Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith, and again, no chattering teacup, no CEO. Someone has to do the books, someone has to keep thinking of new schemes. That's what our CEO does best, besides of enjoying a horizontal life pose, of course. But here with me is a wonderful guest, returning guest, regular on the show, Laury Egan. Laury, hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on again.
Well, and so much of a pleasure is mine because I always have so much fun with you. I'm sorry your pals aren't here, but give them my best. I'm sure one will interrupt at some point.
Oh, I don't think so, because I'm, in the attic and no one can interrupt this session. No one. It's just the two of us. And we are going to talk about your fantastic thriller, The Psychologist's Shadow, which came out in November 2023.
That's right. Yes, it did.
And what a book it is. And I said before we started the recording, I couldn't guess. I'm hopeless. I'm useless. Let's be honest here.
Well, this is a tricky one. The clues as to the identity of the shadow or the stalker of this therapist are there. But as I said to you earlier, I have 3 therapist friends and they didn't get it either. So nobody should feel upset. But I love the fact that this is proving to be a challenge for readers because I think that's the best thing you can say about a mystery like this.
Absolutely. And let's dive in a little bit. Tell us a little bit about this book of yours without giving too much away, of course.
I will not. There is a therapist, Dr. Ellen Haskell, and she has just recently had a traumatic experience with a client in New York City. And she is regrouped to an area outside of Princeton in Hopewell, New Jersey. And is staying at her parents' house, and they're away in Greece. And so she's on this very secluded, forested acreage by herself in a house with a lot of glass windows and sides. So she's starting her new practice in Princeton, New Jersey, right across from the university, and is still a little tentative, but everything is going well. She specializes in clients who have creative talents. And so we begin to get introduced to her various people that have come in to see her, and we get their presentations and sessions. However, interspersed with these sessions and her life are journal entries by the stalker. And these are usually about a half a page long, and they're rather discordant, but they don't really give anything away, except that this person is disturbed. So as we're going through, everything seems to be pretty good for Ellen, but then all of a sudden she's getting hang-up calls. This is 1992, so things aren't like they are right now with, messaging and everything else. And she then starts getting a little presence at the foot of her stairs at the office, and she doesn't understand what's going on or who it is. And then they start happening at home. So bit by bit, slow boil, very simmering suspense, she realizes she's got a really big problem. And as a result, she's trying to figure out who this person is that's doing this, that's calling her and hanging up and leaving things at home and also at the office.
There is a lot in your book that I absolutely enjoyed. Is that the correct thing to say of a thriller? I think it is. Anywho, like you said, those intermediate chapters from the stalker's point of view, they were quite interesting and creepy, if I might add. And also those sessions you describe with her different clients, patients. I was wondering where you found your ideas and how was it possible for you to make them so real?
Well, I've always been very interested in psychology. And when I was in college many, many years ago, I took quite a few courses. And one of them that I really enjoyed was an abnormal psychology class, in which case we had to write up an analysis and case studies. So I've always been fascinated with the idea of how different kinds of people present, how they would dress, how they would speak, their backstory, their history, and what kinds of problems they would have, and trying to uniquely tailor each of these clients to their own presentation and their history. So it was really a lot of fun doing this because I have a high school student, I have a gay male professor at Princeton, I have all these different kinds of people, and I had such a blast putting on the therapist hat and writing these up. It was so much fun. It was just a lovely time of it.
And it was great reading it because, like you said, there are people from all walks of life. You have your working class clients, patient, you have, like you said, the high school student, you have this couple therapy sessions, and you have this strange guy in the epilogue. You said, yeah, well, Robert is Robert.
Yeah.
Which I enjoyed. And coming back to the things I enjoyed, not just the sessions, but also from the reader's point of view, I also like the fact that you didn't leave any loose threads, so to speak, because we get this wonderful epilogue where we learn not also how Ellen is coping with the ordeal, but also what happened more or less to her clients. And also we get this from her therapist's point of view.
Yes. Which I think is fun because, obviously if you've ever been in therapy or done sessions, you never know quite what the therapist is thinking, and you're very curious, I'm sure. And so this book is really, except for the journal entries by the stalker, this is told from Ellen's point of view. So as we step more into the book, we realize and get more and more anxious that something's going on. So it's not told from like third person omniscient where we're, looking at a big picture. We're looking at it through the really narrow lens of the therapist herself and her experience. And she's dealing with other things too, being lonely in a new place where, she didn't grow up, and her parents being away. And so she's got a lot of other things on her plate that also come into this.
Mm. And I was wondering, or the idea I got from her relationship with her parents was that it seemed to me, it's completely my point of view on this, that her parents' relationship felt to me as if it in itself was enough for them. And she was always a bit on the outside. It seemed that way. Maybe it wasn't.
Accurate. Yeah. They were both, professors, and they traveled a lot, either independently or together. One is an art historian, the other was archaeologist. So, they would go to their respective areas often separately. And when she was younger, occasionally she would accompany one or the other of them, but sometimes she didn't. And so, yeah, I think she was sort of a lonely child, a very smart one, obviously. And she had a situation where she had to entertain herself. And in some ways, that's much my experience too, growing up. Although my parents didn't get along as well as hers did. So I wanted to write something about creative people too, because this is a sort of quiet little sub-theme throughout the book, because many of her clients have artistic abilities or something along those lines.
Especially with one of her clients, because you should never judge a book by its cover. And it turns out he also has this artistic streak. You wouldn't guess, given his day job. But there's always a little bit more to everybody, isn't there?
There is. And I think that's one of the things that, really must intrigue therapists, because they think they know their client. And then all of a sudden, the client will demonstrate some insight or, thing that he or she has done, and completely to the surprise of the therapist, because people are not simple, and they often wear a mask, which I have it in my book here that that's an important factor. And then slowly through the therapeutic process, one hopes that that mask eventually drops and the
Mhm.
therapist has more insight into what's really going on with a person.
Is it something that has intrigued you all the time? Because you just said it yourself. We usually do wear different masks, so we do play different roles. For example, we play a different role with our family. We play a different role with friends or at work. And we even sometimes wear masks, even more than role playing. It's hiding behind the mask. That's
Well, that's a very important thematic part of this book, and the masks that I photographed for the cover are from Venice. Obviously, they're Venetian, but I think that that's a very important aspect of people's personalities. I think everybody has the way they hope that they're being viewed in terms of how they're coming across to others,
Mm.
be it family or friends or strangers. And so I think that that's something that's always intrigued me. And this book was written, by the way, I started it back in 1993 and then put it aside. So
Mm.
it was an older book, and then one of my first, either the first or second. And it stayed with me, and then more recently, I just took a look at it and really went to town revising it, made it, huge cuts and changes. So, this concept of the mask has always fascinated me.
And you said you started this book as early as 1993. Is that also the reason why you kept this time? Why you didn't change anything about the time setting of the book?
Um, well, it was written at that point, so, I was invested in that time period, but one of
Mm.
the things that I find really difficult as a mystery writer, or psychological suspense writer is that when you start throwing in computers, cell phones, all this constant ability to find out where everybody is all the time, to connect with them, or to look up things on the internet, that you don't know, um, to do investigations that way. For example, Ellen at one point thinks, well, maybe I should check some of the psychiatric hospitals in the area, but she's got to physically call people.
Mm.
Whereas, these days she would just sit there and write an email or text them
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think this constant connection really makes it hard for people to write a mystery, because everything now is right out there. People can be found.
And looking back on this book, on this manuscript, did you get the feeling that you might have in the now remembered things differently? Did it turn out that you have your memory wasn't as you thought it was?
I had to do a little checking when, particularly for technology things, which I still do. I'm working on one right now, and it's set roughly about in the same period. But then they were car phones then, like a
Oh.
Motorola. They were big box things, and I had to find out when those were available because I had one, but I didn't remember, when it was. So, I'm constantly having to go back and check because technology has changed so quickly, that you're in and out of various, toys, shall we
Mhm.
say,
Mm.
at different periods.
Yeah. And coming back to your main character, Ellen, you alluded a little bit on that. Her start in her new practice was because there was a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
It was an extreme experience, and she's consequently, let's say, um, asking herself what she could have done differently. And that also plays a role in how she deals with her clients now and what's happening now with her stalker as well.
Yeah, I think it's like I don't think it's giving anything away because this happens right at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Client who she's beginning to feel a little attraction for and thinking about maybe ending their therapeutic relationship because she's worried about that. He comes into the office and sets himself afire with gasoline. So she is just she realizes she didn't realize how depressed he was or anything like that. So her whole basis for being a therapist has been shaken.
Mm. And also the fact that for someone who is completely immersed in science and so on, there's also this little bit of a slight touch of the supernatural. I don't want to give too much away, but it feels a little bit of that.
Okay. Well, I hadn't thought of that, but maybe so. I don't know. I mean, the stalker is very unusual. And a very interesting character, but I did a lot of research on this type of stalker, which is a
Mm-hmm.
specific kind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because they present and act out in very, very different ways. I mean, you had all these celebrity stalkers during this period in the 90s, and it still is going on today. But now we have more laws to protect the victims. Whereas back in those days, California, I believe, had an anti-stalker law, but New Jersey, where this takes place, did not. So that really did impede Ellen's ability to get law enforcement behind her, and they were really sort of handcuffed. Plus, she had the problem of not being able to reveal any information about her clients because of, she's not supposed to. So she was really sort of hamstrung in terms of what she could do and what, she enlisted the local Princeton police and also the state police because that was, they had jurisdiction over her home. So these were different times.
Yeah, absolutely. And in how far does her relationship with her mother, do you think, influence her work as a psychologist, or not at all?
Possibly some. I think she, as a child, because she was often on her own and sort of a solitary kid, uh, she probably had to do a lot of analysis about the family dynamics. I mean, triangles are really difficult. I can attest to that, and as a result, that might have been one avenue for her to feel like she had control over her family arrangement a little bit and over herself. I think she probably did have some, the usual mother-daughter war going on. In fact, at one point, I think I mentioned that her mother had given her Nancy Friday's My Mother, Myself, which was actually my mother did the same thing. I used that and had underlined all the parts she wanted Ellen to pay attention to. And Ellen, of course, wanted nothing to do with reading her mother's copy. But later did read another paperback and did find it very interesting. So yeah, the mother-daughter relationship's always a good spur to do various things in your life.
Yeah, when you also get a closer look at the clients' relationships, not just with their parents, also with their siblings, because one of them has, also a tragic event in his life. And also those couples. I found it most interesting also when you describe this Taiwanese American couple where expectations, their own expectations, their, let's say, family expectations do not align all the time.
Yeah, they were both very sophisticated, very smart people, and they both had jobs. And the problem is that they were still dealing with their families, and they were still dealing with the expectations, their traditional cultural expectations about how a family behaves, and they were running into real conflict between their American views cultural views and their family views. So I threw the couples in because, so many therapists do have couples in their practices, and I thought that I could get a couple of, points in there using them.
Mm-hmm. And we touched a little bit upon that. You said you took classes, psychology classes. And what about the research further into this topic? Because you said 3 friends of yours couldn't guess the outcome.
No.
So I'm relieved. How much input came from them regarding those sessions and how you described the clients, or not at all?
Not at all.
No?
I did this one pretty much solo on my own. I did have one therapist friend read it, but she doesn't tend to be too, she doesn't make a lot of suggestions. And so I was hoping to get a little more from her, but she thought, I did a very good job on the presentations for the clients. So I said, okay, well, I guess I did. But no, I pretty much created these individuals sort of like each one was its own little, in a little nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really interesting just to write each person. It was like a little case study. Each person was a different case study.
So that brings me to the writing process. So did you write this session continuously for one client and then the other, or
No.
like it is presented in the book?
I wrote them as they came out, but then I kept a lot of notes, and I usually always keep per character descriptions and anything in their history that's pertinent, dates, relationships. So I had, for each character, I had that. Plus, then I did a calendar per day, so I could keep track of, well, this client comes at Monday at 3:00 or whatever, because that was tricky too, to just try to remember where everybody was at different times, because I also had to create an absence of alibi per people. So as the stalker did something, I had to make it so that numerous people could possibly be able to do that at that time, had access or had the transportation to do it. So that required a lot of juggling right there.
Is that something you did when you wrote the book the first time, or did you keep your notes, or did you just start again afresh?
I I had the manuscript, and it was actually not so bad. However, I didn't have any of my notes from that period, so I had to really do everything all over again, and I did have to do some scrambling around to try to, keep track of the time slots in particular. But, each person has to speak a little differently, so you've got to sort of get that in your ear, how they would talk, because that's just like, what kind of clothes they might wear. Because each person in here, what they wear is really important, and the therapist pays attention to that, because it gives clues to the personality.
Absolutely. And there's also this annoying married cousin.
Yes.
That guy is annoying as hell.
And haven't we run into those before?
I mean,
yeah, because
seriously.
I wanted to broaden it, because, the stalker, she has no idea, Ellen has no idea who the stalker is. It could be a shopkeeper or somebody she buys shoes from, because she's right on Nassau Street in Princeton. So she's right in the middle of the commercial zone there. Or it could be, this family member who has really annoyed the hell out of her. And she's wondering, well, maybe he's trying to get back at her. I mean, maybe he's he's obviously wants to go to bed with her, and she's not interested in that. And so, maybe he's got a bone to pick. So I really wanted to keep it open. So it wasn't just the clients that were hovering around her that could potentially be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree. Because he was also on my list, not just on Ellen's list.
Right.
And God, that man. I mean, we also said Robert is Robert, one of our clients, and that man is also, sometimes he felt as if he's completely detached from reality.
Well, that's the narcissist. That's what he is. He's completely a narcissist.
Hmm.
So, he just doesn't look at the world through anybody else's lenses, just his own. I mean, he's mostly interested in what's good for him.
Hmm.
He's married, but he's not particularly interested in his wife, and he's just a very sort of selfish, narrow-minded individual.
Hmm. There's also another interesting character, which you feel sorry for when you learn about her a little bit. That's the pianist Marguerite.
Yes.
And her relationship with her husband has changed completely over the years. And she needs to, like you said, she needs to grow a little bit of more self confidence and to stand up to her husband and do what she loves to do.
Yeah, she's a very, very high-level pianist, and she met her husband in Europe, and, he was enamored of her talent, so that was his initial
Mm.
attraction, and I'm sure, he was a very charming lover, and then when they got married and moved to the United States, he started becoming more controlling. And then she at first didn't, she thought he was being helpful and it was okay. And then she realized she had a problem. So she's been struggling with this for years. And now everything is just sort of, blown up. And she's having some disability with her hands, I think it was RA, rheumatoid arthritis in her hands, and so as a result, her playing days are gonna be over pretty soon. So she's finally gonna stand up to her husband.
And she does, as we learn in the
Mhm.
epilogue. Not giving too much away, but like I said, your epilogue wraps it up quite nicely for the reader, because I was wondering at the end of the book what happened to the people, and you didn't disappoint.
Yeah, that's one thing I hate is when there are strands left that haven't been answered. On the other hand, it's sort of very difficult not to write this sort of last chapter where and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and that could get really flat. It can be very boring.
Although I have to admit, I was asking myself when I started reading the epilogue, okay, is there something else in there? That's me being suspicious, reading lots and lots of mysteries. So could there be something else in there from her therapist? But there wasn't. She's a good one.
Yeah, I'll leave that up to the reader to find out. I'm not giving anything away.
No, 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 of
But
course
Ellen
not.
is a very she's a fairly strong individual and pretty mature, pretty well sorted out. And then, of course, she's seen, her own therapist over the years when she's had particularly after the trauma with that first client who set himself on fire. So, this is very typical behavior for a psychotherapist to have a second, older, usually more mature,
Mm.
more experienced therapist to talk to so that any cases of transference or anything like that that comes up in sessions can get sorted out without having the therapist contaminate the sessions with her own client. So this also takes place here in this novel.
Mm. Was there a particular incident back then when you started writing this novel? Because you said before that in the 90s there were lots of stalking of, celebrities happening. Was there a particular incident that triggered the idea for this novel, or not at all?
Um, I was aware of a few. I can't remember now which one I cited, but there was a celebrity stalker of somebody. A guy was really attracted to this celebrity, a female celebrity, and wound up, looking all over for her, finally finding her house and then shooting her.
Hmm.
Because stalking can just be a nuisance, but it also can veer into real violence depending on the situation. Because what happens, the basic concept of stalking is that usually you have a character who has very low self-esteem. I hate that phrase, by the way. But is think of them as sort of a hole, a black hole. And so what they're trying to do by stalking somebody is they affix onto another person that they perceive
Mm.
as more successful, more beautiful, more handsome, more powerful. And then they sort of want to pull this into themselves. And by the relationship with this successful person, they're filling their own hole, so to
Mm.
speak. So this is a very tenuous relationship between a stalker and the victim. And as a result, I was aware of this going on at the time, yes, but it's always had been something that had fascinated me just from a psychological point of view. So I did read, a number of books on the subject at the time, and then, worked on this book.
And from your research, is it more prevalent in male uh, stalkers, or are there more male men or more women, or is it equal?
I don't really know the answer to that. My guess is that there's more information about male stalkers because they're more likely to be more extreme in their behavior. They're more likely to move it into criminal
Hmm.
uh, stalking. And as I say now, that is something that is against the law. You hear now about people like ex-husbands being told they had to stay X amount of feet away from the house or away from the children or whatever. But back then, that wasn't so much the case. So yeah, it's just always been something that fascinated me. It's just a very interesting psychological thing. And in this case, it's erotomania, which is the type of stalking,
Yeah.
which isn't erotic. And it's not necessarily even sexual, but it's just
Mhm.
one type of mania. And it's sort of like pyromania, where people are, arsonists are fascinated with fire, or religious manias, where they might have a cult leader. There are various different kinds of manias that we,
Mhm.
have in this world, but this is just one of them.
So, do you think there is one kind of stalker that is more prevalent than the other? Because, like you said, it's not about sexual gratification in the end, but
Well, there
some
are
or
some that might be
yeah.
the case, but not this particular one.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I I really don't know for a fact how that goes, but there are differences, and it can be started very innocently. Like, let's say, a husband and wife break up, but the husband still feels entitled
Mhm.
to the relationship, or still feels that the wife belongs to him. So this is a little different kind of thing. This is possessiveness.
Mm.
And, it can lead to more criminal acts. Let's say the ex-wife gets involved with somebody else. The ex-husband could, for example, go after this
Mm.
boyfriend,
Mm.
or, if it's two women, it could be a girlfriend. So as a result, starts out as part of a sense of entitlement
Yeah.
that the person who's been left might feel about, the partner.
Mm. Do you think it has become easier? Because you said there are more laws that prevent people or help get rid of stalkers, or but it has become easier through social media to stalk someone.
Oh, I think so, absolutely. I mean, you hear constantly on murder mysteries or whatever that, one partner has bugged the phone so that he or she can keep track of the location
Mm.
of her husband or wife. That's one thing that people are doing on occasion, and they're doing it to their children too sometimes. But then, you can go on Facebook
Yeah.
if the person is posting, you might, say, "Oh, I'm gonna be in, um, Vienna tomorrow at this shop," then, well, everybody knows where that person's gonna
Yeah.
be. So there's a lot, we promote constantly, or
Mm.
we're going on a holiday, yay for us, and look, this is where we're staying at this hotel. So I think we do a huge amount to help our stalkers in the world right now. There's definitely, because I mean, you're right. I mean, we can find out huge amounts of information, personal data about
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
online.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the editing process of this book before, and I was wondering, uh, including this editing process, was there a lot of getting rid of information in the book, or did you add more information?
A bit of both. It
Mm.
was a fairly good-sized book, and, mostly what I tried to do is really hone in on the details per client, trying to get it really tailored so that, as you move from client to client, you still knew exactly which client was in the room just by
Mm.
how they dressed or behavior. So I would say I got rid of some stuff. I cut some of the, uh unnecessary description, although this is still a very, descriptive book in many ways. I mean, nature plays a part. She's at this house on several acres of forest. So, being there, and the beauty of the nature around her is important.
Yes, it is the beauty of nature, but at the same time, you get the impression of this creepy feeling, of this eerie feeling. What could or who could hide in the trees, or who could have a view of her home, of her privacy?
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of this is a modern house, so there's a lot of glass. There's a big deck, with sliders. And, you know, when they when her parents bought the house or built the house, because of all the forest around, they weren't worried about privacy particularly. There wouldn't be people that would just be walking by and looking in. But now Ellen realizes the same beautiful openness and looking out on the stream and the forest and everything also is a negative for her, and because of the forest, her sight lines looking out are somewhat blocked, even though this takes place in the autumn.
Mm. As
So, yeah,
yeah,
double-edged
yeah.
sword.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a reader, when you read this description, especially the second part of the book, when she's wondering about what's going on, you also get this kind of feeling where you start, looking over your shoulder and who's going to watch. I mean, it's not going to happen in our home. Uh, but we're not in the middle of the Viennese forest. But I can imagine when you're alone at home in a similar surrounding, you might feel a little bit anxious.
Well, exactly. I mean, I based this, house on a friend's house in Hopewell, but I also had one a couple of miles away
Hmm.
that was a '60s modern, and it was glass all around it, and flat roof house, 2 acres. And anybody could see in, and there weren't any curtains particularly, and, you just didn't think about it, but then, if you start getting these hang up phone calls at home and little things left on the doormat, well, you really do change the way you think about your security.
Yep.
You realize this house is just not a good one to have somebody who was stalking you.
Yeah, because like you said, it's a two-edged sword. Because on the one hand, you have nothing to hide.
Right.
That's the idea for people not having curtains and so on. But on the other hand, everyone else sees what you're doing, especially if there is a lot of, walking, enjoying the nature and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. So, this house, as I said, it was based on sort of a combination of one I lived in myself and then one I, lived in
Oh,
temporarily. And the setting, in fact, I even say Stony Brook Road, which is where this one house was. So I used a real setting. I changed the floor plan a little bit. In fact, that's something else I always do. I draw plans so I remember where all the rooms are.
okay. And did you feel a little bit anxious when you stayed at that house, or not at all?
Um, Not at the house that I depicted in the novel, but when I was at the house that I lived in, we did have an incident.
Ooh.
A a a f a friend who was staying there, her husband went completely off the rails, and, we got a warning phone call from a friend of hers saying he's coming to the house and he's got a knife.
Ui.
So I called my father, luckily, and he came with a shotgun and hung out. And the guy did show up. My father went up to the road to stop him, just with my dog, my beagle, and just pretending he's walking the dog, and that dissuaded the guy. And then, of course, called the state police. So it was really a scary incident.
Mm.
So that really did sort of change my view of the house. And this happened before I wrote this book, so maybe that had a little bit in the back of my mind in terms of how frightening these places can be out in the country.
Absolutely. I mean, also given the fact that the United States are a very vast place and you have more than one remote place where bad things can happen. I mean, they can. They can also happen in a city. So let's be honest.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think most crimes do occur in cities or in fairly close urban communities.
Absolutely, and yet crime fiction, it always happens, in a quaint little village.
Well, exactly. I just finished reading an Anthony Horowitz's new novel, and he did the first 7 episodes of Midsummer
Midsummer.
Murders and Foyle's War, and then Magpie Murders, and he just has so much fun, creating these little. This is close to death, so close has a dual meaning. A close being a small community, enclosed, and also close near to death. I loved the title of that. So yeah, that was fun. So this isn't really a cozy by any means, but there are basically 2 main primary locations: the office in Princeton and the house outside of it. So, in that sense, it's sort of restricted. And I usually do better with writing stories like that, where the setting is a little more circumscribed.
But it was an absolutely fascinating read. And may I ask, what's next? What can we look forward to?
Well, continuing my psychological fascinations, I have a book coming out, I believe May 18th, called Jack and I, with an ampersand. And it's about a boy with dissociative identity disorder, which is the old multiple personality disorder. So the book is told from the host, Jack, in first person, and then alternating with the alter, the split personality, Jack, in third person. So it goes from the host, who's rather shy, very scrupulous, very careful, does his homework, studies for exams, and then Jack, who is basically a sociopathic kind of personality, who doesn't care anything at all about anybody except himself, and he is fed up with his host self. So he does little things like, hurts him. And, it's a really interesting study. So that's coming out in May, Jack and I. And then I've got 2 on the burners right now. One is a story collection, which I've just been writing short stories, which is sort of a nice change after these long, protracted novels. And that I haven't quite decided what's going to be in there, but I've got about 20 stories, many of which have been published in literary journals. And then I may include a small play, and possibly a piece called The Triangle Quartet, about a relationship that occurs with a poet from a distance. And so it's the rise of the excitement and then the demise. So it's an interesting structure. But I don't know whether I'm going to do all of these or not. I'm waiting to hear some advice from friends. And then I have another murder mystery I'm waiting on. It's called Fair Haven, which is set in a local town by that name, which I thought was a lovely, ironic name for a murder mystery. And I'm waiting on a former policeman, to go and give me the procedural corrections, because I found out that homicides would be handled very differently than they would in a BBC novel.
Yep, absolutely true. Ooh, that's a lot. That's a lot to looking forward to. And who is going to publish Jack and I?
The same. I have an absolutely wonderful publisher, Andrew May,
Okay.
Spectrum Books in London, and he has established an imprint called Enigma Books, which this is the first one in that new series, the Psychologist Shadow, and then Jack and I will be the third book, I believe. And so he's published me in both of his imprints, and he's just wonderful. So I have 4 books now. Well, with him, and then possibly maybe he'll take these 2. He's
Mm.
lovely guy. I'm
Mm.
really happy to have him as my publisher.
And I would so love to see the Psychologist's Shadow on TV.
It would make a good one, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I would even make a small series.
Yeah, a
A
little
6 part.
mini-series.
Oh,
Yeah, because the characters were all very interesting,
yeah.
and strange,
Yeah.
so you could get some really great character actors in here. Absolutely, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. It
see.
would be great. And was there any character in the book you had more trouble than with the others?
The couples, I had more trouble with the
Mm.
couples, because I didn't wanna go on too long with them, but I needed to make some points, and so that I found the most difficult,
Mm-hmm.
and also to sort of separate the 2 of them a little bit, make them different from the other clients. Those were the ones that I had the most difficulty writing. I had fun with Dolly, who was one of the more unusual characters, who obviously had some kind of trauma when she was really small, and, she was a really wonderful character to write. I really enjoyed her, and I liked Samantha Sam, who was a high school student. I had fun with that too.
Mm. And what about Greta?
Well, I actually based Greta on someone I knew, which I don't usually do, but, I had a friend in Princeton who, I used a little of her presentation, the way she looked, and I changed a lot about her.
Mm-hmm.
But, I confess, I cribbed a little bit.
Yeah, why not? It's okay. And which part of the novel was the hardest to write? I'm not talking about characters, I'm talking about writing a certain plot in the book that was extremely hard for you.
I think the journal entries were tricky because,
Hmm.
I had to keep them enigmatic
Mm-hmm.
without giving it really any clues.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they're written first person, but I'm very scrupulous about what I reveal. So I was constantly having to, you know, change that and make sure to scrub out anything that might be too much information,
Yeah.
but yet enough information to keep I use them sort of to keep the reader on edge because they're in between sort of units. And I they were really important to do those just right. I wanted to get a creepy tone, but also indicative of someone who's really distressed and
Yeah.
disoriented a little bit.
Yeah. And it came across like that. Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
And coming back to the idea that a producer is listening to us here or watching this video, who would you like to play Ellen?
Oh boy. Well, Glenn Close is too old, but I would like somebody that has bearing, has sophistication,
Mm.
and intelligence. Maybe Kate Winslet could do it,
Oh.
or Kate Blanchett. One of the 2 of them might be really good. You want somebody with some stature, a little bit of, real presence, and but who can sort of withdraw and let the client come out. So it's
Mm.
not just an overbearing kind of a person, but somebody who really feels like they have some inner strength and, has figured life out pretty well. So, I guess somebody in their 40s would be best.
Mm. I mean, one can say that Kate Winslet has grown a lot since, this whole Titanic disaster.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. They just had a nice article on her in the New York Times Magazine. That was really interesting. Yeah.
Okay. And who doesn't like, Kate Blanchett? Seriously.
Yeah, of course.
This goes without saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No question there. Absolutely. And Laurie, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Well, if anybody reads the book, I always love to hear from readers. It's always so much fun, particularly if you figured out who the stalker is. I'd love to know, or you didn't and you're frustrated. Let me know that too. But I have a website with my name. I always use my middle initial, Laury A. Egan. And you can look up my other books because this will be my 14th book. Coming out with a story collection as well and 4 volumes of poetry. So I have, a lot of very diverse books out there, and they range from psychological suspense, which this one is, to comedy and young adult and all kinds of books. So literary. So I hope people will go check it out.
Oh, I'm absolutely sure they will, and they will not be disappointed. And this one, I wasn't frustrated. I didn't guess. I always thought, it's him. No, it's her. It's him. It's her. No, But I wasn't frustrated. I thought, okay, I did. Oh, interesting.
The evidence was there, varied a bit, but it's, I was trying to be very careful not to tip my hand.
Yeah, you didn't. You didn't. And like you said, 3 psychologists didn't.
No luck.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah. Laurie, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
As always.
And I will join you shortly in the green room, so don't go, please.
Okay.
Dear listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you would like to support us, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee, Ko-fi, or you can even become a Patreon and get early access to our new episodes. Again, tune in for another episode from us, and we'll see you then. Until next time.